Once upon a time, emergency management would say we treat everyone the same, and that was easy. That was all-encompassing. No, we treat everyone the same regardless of whether they're, their ethnic background, their faith group, their gender. But that's not the case, and we can't afford to treat everyone the same. And quite frankly, we're resourced now where we can actually look at intersectionality and treat people differently in an equity lens, depending on what they need in a certain circumstance.
Diversity inclusion is a wonderful way of going. One of the issues though is that when you focus on diversity and inclusion and you just layer up a series of hyphenated identities, something like gender, which functions very differently. Gender is not a minority, women are a majority in Australia. Gender disappears, and that's been a history of diversity and inclusion. Some of the gendered initiatives just disappear in terms of focus, and yet they're still different. For LGBTIQA+ people, if your diversity and inclusion doesn't unpick what's specific to that group under a diversity and inclusion banner, if we get blancmanged with everything, it does become just generic statements, and they sound, we want people to be their authentic selves. Well, what's specific to women? What's specific to LGBTIQ? You need that detail, and some organisations do that and some don't.
A theme throughout this conference is that our services need to start representing the communities that they work with and work for. You can't have, a whole setup of white men going into communities when communities look like myself. I want to be represented in the people that come and help me, and also understand who I am and what my needs are in that certain situation.
Our focus on diversity is very much around gender because disasters seem to exacerbate the stereotypical expected behaviours for people according to their gender. So men are expected to be protectors and providers, even though it's impossible in a catastrophic disaster. And women are expected to really forego their rights as autonomous women, able to pursue a career, even to the extent of having to put up with violence against them.
I really wanted organisations to understand what's going on in Victoria with our new legislation and how the fire and emergency services are all included in that legislation and what they're having to do as a result of that. But what's really important about that is that they're not only looking at their own organisations and how gender unequal they are, but they're also having to bring a gender lens to every policy, program or service that they deliver to the public that has a significant public impact, and how that is so important to creating change in relation not just to their organisations but also to the community.
If we look at the international data on disability and disaster, we find that people with disability are 2 to 4 times more likely to die in a disaster than the general population. And given that 1 in 5 Australians have a disability, that's a pretty significant risk when disasters strike. So if you think about emergency personnel and your typical government emergency planner, there's no reason to assume they have a lot of experience with disability. And so, not by any fault, but perhaps by acts of omission, disability isn't front of mind. And I think when disability is in front of mind, it doesn't go into our plans. And what do our emergency personnel need when a disaster strikes? They need the plan. And so unfortunately, we kind of miss the boat in the first instance. But I think for some people in that room, particularly those who are involved in disaster recovery, it's also important because even if we missed people with disability from the outset, it doesn't mean we can't start thinking about them and thinking about what happened in the disaster, what went wrong, how could we have helped you better. All of those things will really go a long way to making sure that voice is in the plans for the next disaster that strikes.
There is no silver bullet to increasing diversity and inclusion in organisations. We can definitely increase diversity by adding women, adding people of colour and so forth, and hopefully stirring and some magic happens. Unfortunately, that's not usually the case, because there has to be a culture of inclusion that values their voices, listens to their ideas, listens to the things they have to say, and they have to feel equally valued in their organisations. And so it's not a case of add women and stir and everything will be fixed. There is a huge amount of work to be done in organisations, particularly male-dominated organisations, but most organisations, to be frank, to actually shift that culture that equally values diverse voices and equally values inclusion.